one for Devo. I didn't know it was going to be a full lesson tonight, but tonight, what I did 2 weeks ago was pick a theme for a couple of lessons of batting average. It was baseball season, so I thought maybe I'd make an application of that. And I started out last week, as you remember, 2 weeks ago, as you remember, talking about Jesus, of course, being here for 33 and a third years. And Methuselah was here for 969 years. And when Methuselah died, I think it's recorded in Genesis 5:27, it says, and he died. Because Jesus at 33 and a half years thereabout, doing more to shape this world then and forever than anybody to ever live, and without sin. We talked about how he's our perfect example. And in 1 Peter 2:21-22, it talks about that we should follow. English Standard Version says, might follow. The idea is we have a goal. As I mentioned, if Eve and Adam hadn't sinned, we'd have done it for them. Because in Romans 3:10 and 3:23, it makes it crystal clear to remind us all that we are sinners and there's nothing to do about that. That's just the way it is. So let's continue on tonight on the theme of batting average. Let's talk about, to help you, the biggest challenge a speaker has, I believe, is to get the audience thinking with them. So to get you thinking about batting average a little bit, I want to mention a baseball star that maybe your parents or grandparents may have talked to you about. That was Babe Ruth. You may remember the name. It's way before our generation, but maybe you do remember the name. And what you know is he set records. And the one record that most people remember, of course, is his home runs. When the Yankees got him, he was with another team. When the Yankees got him, they realized he was a pitcher, by the way, and they realized his bat was much more valuable than an arm. And so, in a career, he had 714 home runs in his career. Now, he's noted for several records, and some of them still stand today. The home run record stood for 30 years before it was broken. But another record he made that we don't think about too much is strikeouts. He struck out 1,330 times to hit those 714 home runs. That just set things in perspective. He struck out almost twice for every time he had a home run. Let's make a spiritual application about some guys that struck out some. And maybe come around and hit a home run. Let's look first at Moses. We'll turn to Exodus chapter 2. Get a Bible to Exodus chapter 2. Most everybody's familiar with Moses, but just as a little background, in Exodus chapter 2, you look at verse 8, and Pharaoh's daughter said to her, go, and the maid went and called the child's mother. Now, you talk about the providence of God. I'm going to tell you, this is one of the best examples. There are others, of course. They're one of the best examples about the providence of God you're going to find in your Bible. Is here they are, Hebrews, captives, in the palace as servants in Pharaoh's palace, and the Lord, through his providence, arranges to have his own natural mother raise him. That's a very significant point, because when you look on down in verse 10, the child grew, and she brought him up to Pharaoh's daughter, and became her son, and she called his name Moses, and said she, because I drew him out of the water. Now, in verse 11, it says, it came to pass in those days when Moses was grown, and he went out into his brother. Let me stop right there for just a moment. Who has been with him, who was raising him and been with him for these 40 years? His mother, right? How else does he develop a sense of love for his brethren and doing godly things? And you can learn that from the Pharaoh. So in the Pharaoh's household, she has taught her son the valuable lessons only a mother could teach. And it came to pass in 11, when Moses was grown, he went into his brethren to look on their burdens, and he spied an Egyptian smiting an Hebrew, one of his brethren. He sees one of his brethren, and again, why would he leave? Why would he leave luxury? I mean, 40 years of anything you need, anything you want, living in the lap of luxury. But he leaves that. Who gave him that love for his brother? That was his mother. But he goes back down there and he sees one of his brothers being beaten by an Egyptian soldier. So he jumps in the act. He looked this way and that way, and nobody's looking. And he saw there was someone. He slew the Egyptian and hit him in the sand. Now, 15 of this the same chapter 2, verse 15. Now, when Pharaoh heard this thing, he sought to slay Moses. But Moses fled from the face of Pharaoh and dwelt in the land of Midian. Next 40 years. All right? We got the first 40 in the palace. We got 40 years in Midian. I had an employee one time. As most of you know, we were in business and we had a construction company. One of my best men lived in North Bartow County. He was a true mountain man. I mean, mountain man. When they had the babies, she said, "Go up on the mountain and get some water for this young'un." I took the mason jars up, and I mean, it was high. I knew where that spring was, and there was a stream of water coming out of the side of that mountain at the top. And she wanted, she would not have her children have any well water for many months. I forget how many months it was. But anyway, up on the mountain, this mountain man went periodically to get the water for the children. So when you talk about going to Midian and he sat down by a well, keep in mind, 40 years plus 40 years, we've a total of 80 years. Now, one of the saddest statements you're going to find in your Bible, I believe, it ranks as one of the saddest, is in Joshua chapter 1, verse 2. Now, he is, it says there, Moses, my servant, is dead. Okay? That's stated once in Deuteronomy, at the end of Deuteronomy. It's stated in the very first of Joshua. Moses, my servant, is dead. Now, here's a man that's committed murder, and that's not his only strike. He gets another strike. And let's go look at Numbers chapter 20. Numbers chapter 20, verses 10 through 12. Before he dies, in the wilderness though, where that death occurred, before he dies, he's been guiding these his rebellious brethren for 40 years in the wilderness. And they needed water, for this is a second occurrence. They needed water. And in Numbers chapter 20, and verse 7, the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, verse 8, take thy rod and gather thou the assembly together, thou and Aaron thy brother, and speak ye unto the rock before their eyes, and it shall give forth water, and thou shalt bring forth to the water out of the rock. And Moses, verse 9, took the rod. And you can almost see the frustration, but he's been instructed to speak. Verse 10, and Moses and Aaron gathered the congregation together before the rock, and he said, hear now, ye rebels, must we fetch you water out of this rock? Can you see the frustration? I mean, he's been going through this a long time. The murmuring, the difficulties, but he's being disobedient. And he's being disobedient in front of 2 million people. He's being disrespectful and disobedient to God in front of the multitude. And the Lord spake in verse 12, said, because you believe me not to sanctify me in the eyes of the children of Israel, therefore you shall not bring this congregation into the land which I've given them. And he buried him. Most of you know that. So that's the 120 years of Moses. 40 in the palace, 40 in Midian, and 40 in the wanderings. Now that's a couple pretty heavy strikes. You and I would look at that and say, well, he struck out maybe once with the death, the murder. Maybe he struck out again, or at least got a couple of strikes against him when he hit the rock instead of speaking to it. Well, we got a hint in Deuteronomy 1 and verse 2, Joshua 1 and 2, when he says, Moses, my servant, is dead, right? What did he call him? He said, it's a sad statement. Moses, my servant, is dead. Let's look at the home run. Turn to Hebrews chapter 11, please. Hebrews chapter 11. Start at verse 23. Hebrews 11:23. By faith, Moses, when he was born, was hid 3 months with his parents because they saw he was a proper child, and they were not afraid of the king's commandments. By faith, Moses, when he was come to years, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter. He had made up his mind at that 40-year period, I'm going to go help my brethren. Look what he chose in verse 25. Choosing rather to suffer affliction with the people of God than to enjoy the pleasures of sin for a season, esteeming the reproach of Christ greater riches than the treasures of Egypt. For he had respect unto the recompense of the reward. In verse 27, by faith he forsook Egypt, not fearing the wrath of the king, for he endured as seeing him who is invisible. Now, again, I want you to just think of the job his mother did with him. Okay? That's what he did. It said, by faith he did that. And he did it on his own. And of course, 28 verse, he says that through faith he kept the Passover. Verse 29, by faith he passed through the Red Sea. And we know all the things he did. As far as I'm concerned, in the process of hitting his home run, he had some strikes, like you and I are going to have in our life. He had some, we would say, pretty serious strikes. But the point is, he stayed with it and got his reward. Let's look at another one who had some strikes, King David. You may be familiar with that. Most likely you are. But if you're like me, we're going to study tonight about these strikes that King David had against him. But for some reason, in the religious world, and sometimes even in the church, in my last 50 years or so, I've heard about Bathsheba and Uriah. Bathsheba and Uriah. Bathsheba and Uriah. And that's true. But that's not all of it. And for some reason, the rest of it oftentimes is not included. But we're going to include that tonight. Let's start with 2 Samuel chapter 11. And most of you, of course, are very aware of his sin with Bathsheba. We'll start off in verse 1 and see if we can find out what maybe started all this problem. In 2 Samuel 11:1, it came to pass after the year was expired. And notice this, at the time when the kings go forth to battle. Okay? What did the king normally do when his kingdom was at warfare? He went out there. Now, he was way back from the front line, very well protected. But he's out there directing his troops. Well, David sent Joab, who happens to be his nephew. If you need documentation, I've got that written down here somewhere. Here, 2 Samuel 8:16, if you're making notes. 2 Samuel 8:16 will document that Joab, his general, this is the general of his military, he is the nephew of David. So he sends Joab, go to verse 1. And they're fighting in a place called, if you notice the last part of verse 1, a place called Rabbah, R-A-B-B-A-H. Now look at the word but. The last sentence of verse 1 of chapter 11 starts with the word but. But what? But David did what? He didn't go. He didn't go. He goes strolling out in verse 2 on his rooftop. He sees Bathsheba. And then he inquires and finds out in verse 3, the last part, that she's a wife of Uriah the Hittite. I want you to notice in verse 4, David sent messages, and look at the words in the King James, and took her. He ordered her. They took her. They didn't send a little invitation. They took her, and she became pregnant, and that's recorded in verse 5. Now, what we start to see now is some strikes. Okay? We're going to see some strikes. You and I would call them pretty serious strikes. David sent to Joab, who's his nephew, saying, "Send me Uriah the Hittite." Now, that, of course, would raise some eyebrows amongst the troops. Why is Uriah leaving now? But anyway, now he uses a little bit of a fake conversation here. Look what he says in verse 7. When Uriah was come, David demanded, now, first of all, how you doing? How's Joab? How's my nephew? How's my general doing down there? Okay, how's Joab doing? Number one. Number two, how are the troops doing? How are the soldiers getting along out there? And number three, how's the war going along? So he's trying to strike up some kind of conversation as an excuse to get him back there. By the way, David said in verse 8, he said, "Look, Uriah, while you're here," I'm adding that just for emphasis, "go down to your house and clean up, wash your feet, clean up, and the idea is they're going to spend some time with your wife." And he kind of encourages that some more by sending some food. You look at the last part of verse 8, he sends meat down there, okay, to try to coax this thing to happen, to get him off the hook. But there's that word "but" again. Look at the first word in verse 9. But Uriah slept at the door. And then in verse 8, and when this was told David said in the middle of verse 10, "You came all this way and you didn't go, you came all this way from the battlefield and you didn't go and see your wife?" And Uriah said, look, his response is amazing. If you're not thinking right now of him being one of the mighty men, knowing that, you're not surprised at this. He's one of the mighty men. And by the way, these are a list of these mighty men are in 2 Chronicles chapter 11, verses 26 through 47. And in 41 of that listing, of those, when it goes down to 47, verse 41, it says, one on the list of mighty men is Uriah the Hittite. David, I don't think, is really understanding. He's not thinking, naturally, he's not thinking clear, doing this kind of stuff, but he's just one of my highly trained men. This is a SEAL team. This is a special forces. This is the Black Ops. This is the best I've got. Highly trained, highly skilled, very brave, and extremely dedicated. And look at the answer here in verse 11. Hey, look, David, he says, "Israel and Judah abide in tents, and my lord Joab and the servants of Joab, and they're in the open fields." And continuing in verse 11, "Shall I go in my house to eat and drink, and lie with my wife, as thou livest, and as thy soul liveth?" Look at what he says in the last sentence, the last phrase in verse 11. "I will not do this thing." I'm not going to do it, king. To tell the king you're not going to do something. David said, well, plan A didn't work, by the way. That's plan A. Plan A didn't work. So David is already thinking of plan B. Here comes plan B. And David said to Uriah, "Tarry with me here today." And look in the middle of verse 12. "I will let, and tomorrow I will let thee depart." What's he saying? You're staying here tonight. You're going to stay one more night because I'm going to give this thing another try. David called him, he did eat and drink before him and made him drunk. And even when he went down to lie in his bed with the servants of his Lord, look at the last part of verse 13. Here's that word "but" again. "But went not down to his house." What happened to plan B? Didn't do any better than plan A, did it? Another strike? I'd say this is another strike. So now, in verse 14, Came to pass the next morning, when he realized that plan didn't work, David wrote a letter to Joab, and he sends Uriah's death notice by Uriah. He's carrying the seal. Of course, the king would seal a letter. Can you just imagine Uriah's got that in his pocket, and he's carrying his own death notice down to Joab. Anyway, in verse 15, we see what was in the letter. And David is so bent out on getting Uriah killed now that he's going to tell Joab. You know, when do you tell a general how to conduct a war? I think maybe in the Vietnam War some of that was done. But anyway, the general gets told by David in verse 15, and Uriah said to the force, he said, put him in the forefront of the hottest battle and retire or retreat from him, that he may be smitten and die. So he's telling Joab that this is what I want you to do. We have got to kill this guy. And here's my formula to be absolutely sure that we kill him. It came to pass when Joab observed the city, he assigned, that is what? He gave his order, Uriah, this is where I want you. A place where he knew that valiant men, the bravest men the enemy had, the best fighters that the enemy had, that's where I want to put you. He's taking to Uriah. Verse 17, when the city went out, he fought with Joab. Now, here is the part that for some reason, religious-minded people, Bible study students don't tell the rest of it, and I don't know why. I maybe heard it one time in 50 years. And I heard this story many times. I've had it in writing, in books and publications. Here it is. Verse 17, the men of the city went out and fought with Joab. The enemy came out and fought, and there fell some of the people of the servants of David, and they succeeded. Uriah the Hittite died also. But who also died with Uriah? Some of his own soldiers. When they retreated, when they got up in the hottest part of the battle, Joab orders retreat, and as those men are retreating, keep in mind now they're in a raging war. And he has them withdraw. And several, we don't know how many, but several of David's soldiers were killed in the process of having Uriah killed. And Joab he sent a message. Now I want you to notice something. In verses 19, 20, and 21, here is the information that Joab gives his messenger. Okay, Joab is telling this messenger, this is what I want you to tell the king. And that's outlined for us in 19, 20, 21. And of course he concludes with, thy servant Uriah the Hittite is dead also. Last part of verse 21. Now verse 22, so the messenger went and came and showed David all. Look at the word all in verse 22 now. All that Joab had sent him for. So all that message above, those three verses, that whole message, he tells David. He tells David. And before we go any further, I want you to notice in verse 20, that he's even prepared in case the king gets mad at the messenger that he sent it. Because it says in verse 20, and if so it be that the king's wrath arise. You know, he's trying to prepare this man, a soldier, he's trying to prepare for everything. So, in verse 23, the messenger said to David, surely the men prevailed against us. The enemy beat us. Hey, now, David, I want to tell you, they beat us. Yeah, it says they prevailed against us. Okay? And they came at us in all directions. In the field, and were upon us even to entering of the gate. I mean, the enemy was everywhere. All around us. And they were in a militarily advantageous position. They were in an elevated position. Anyone with military background and knowledge knows that if you're in an elevated position, you command the high ground. You've got a tremendous advantage militarily. Look at verse 24. And the shooting shot from off the wall. Now he's repeating what we've already found out. He says, and some of the king's servants be dead, and thy servant Uriah the Hittite is dead also. Hey, we got it done. King, we got it done. And David said to the messenger, now look, I want to give you a message that go back again. Now keep in mind, here's the message that we had. A message to David, right? And David back and forth. Now it's time for David to send back a message. And he says, look, in verse 25, tell Joab, let not this thing displease thee. No, don't be upset about this, Joab. What's he say? For the sword devoureth one as well as another. And these things happen in war. Yeah, tell Joab not to worry about this. This kind of thing happens in war. Okay? Don't just relax. He says, as well as another, make thy battle more strong. You just go ahead and remember while you're there. That is to destroy this city and overthrow it. And look what it says in the last verse of 25. Encourage him. You think maybe Joab, most people with their conscience be vulnerable, most somewhat even normal people, Joab probably was bothered. He said, you encourage him. Don't let this get him down. Things like this happen in war. Now, this is David telling all this. Another strike, huh? Now, his wife Bathsheba is doing the one thing that makes sense to me in this narrative. She's mourning. Look at the next verse. And then the wife of Uriah heard that Uriah, her husband, was dead, and she mourned for her husband. I feel sorry for her. She had to do what the king said, but she loved her husband. And she's seen this whole thing. The last verse of this chapter, when the morning was past, David sent, I want you to notice this now, he sent, remember verse 4? He took her. Now what's he do? He fetches her. Oh yeah, mission accomplished. Hey, I got it done. I pulled it off. Look at the last sentence of that verse. But, there's that word but again. Verse 27, but the thing that David had done displeased who? Displeased the Lord. Now, we keep on going over now, and we see these, might as well say he struck out. I say probably, if you want to say morally he struck out, pretty good chance you say he struck out. We'll make a couple comments out of verse 12.
Wait,
I
was going to say, you said that he displeased the Lord, and I have an NS, and it said what he had done was evil.
Okay, yeah, well, that's a good translation. It's truly sin, isn't it?
Yes, it does say.
It surely is sin.
Yes.
But let's look at his sins for just a minute. 4 P's. Was it sin personal? Did he personally see her? Did he personally require her to come up? Did he personally try to get Uriah, purposely brought him from the battlefield? Did he personally try to encourage him the first night to go in there? Did he personally do that? Did he personally the next night try to get him drunk? Did he personally send a note to Joab? Did he personally tell Joab how to kill him? Personal, huh? How about public? Was it public? Yeah, when he went and got her, that was public. And when he helped get him drunk, that was public. And I can guarantee when these soldiers withdrew, that word travels around the battlefield like right now. If they were going to withdraw from a mighty man, you can bet the whole troop would be totally public. How about progressive? Was it progressive? We see him go from one A, plan B, plan C. It was progressive. And let me ask you this. Wasn't it just plain pitiful?
Well,
For a grown man? Well, what did it do? Anybody?
well, I was thinking
Yeah.
too, it went from lusting to actually carrying it out and then to murder.
Come
So
on,
it was some progression
yeah.
that way as well.
Now, so it looks pretty bad. But let me tell you something. Keep in mind, Acts 13:22 says that David was a man after God's own heart. This is back in Samuel as well. Repeated to us in Acts 13:22. A man after God's own heart. Now, was he a man after God's own heart? Oh, look at that. I want her up here. And all the things that followed, was he a man after God's own heart? No. He had what? He had a change of what? He had a change of heart. Now, just as our hearts can, all of you that are here that are Christians, you, I'm sure, remember when you had your change of heart. Okay? Maybe the day before you got baptized, maybe 2 hours before you were baptized. But whatever you remember, very likely that baptism, and you remember your heart changing. You were convicted. You remember that. David was godly. One of my references, Johnny Ramsey, says that when he became king, he was godly throughout. Godly in and out. But he had a change of heart, didn't he? I'm going to suggest to you that he had another one. Turn to Psalm 51. Psalm 51, please. Psalm verse 51. And I think you're going to witness here another change of heart that you and I can have. Psalm 51. And I'm just going to go through, for the sake of time, some of the words of each of the verses, most of them. Look at Psalm 51, verse 1. Have mercy upon me, O God, according to thy loving kindness, and according to the multitude of thy tender mercies, blot out my transgressions. Verse 2. Wash me thoroughly from mine iniquity and cleanse me from my sin. Verse 4, I acknowledge, God, I'm telling you, I know I did this thing. I'm acknowledging that I did it. I acknowledge my transgression, and my sin is forever before us. He said, I can't get it out of my mind. It's ever before me. Verse 4, against thee and thee only have I sinned. God, I did this against you personally. I know that. Verse 5, behold, he even blames his birth. Verse 6. Behold, thou desirest truth of the inward parts. Verse 7, purge me with hyssop, and I shall be clean. Verse 8, hear me to make joy and gladness. Verse 9, hide thy face, God, please look the other way. Please, Lord, I want these sins gone. Hide thy face from my sins and blot out all mine iniquities. Verse 10, create me in a clean heart. He talking about a heart change, isn't he? I want to change his heart back. That's what he's saying. Verse 11, cast me not away. God, please don't reject me. He says, cast me not away from thy presence. Verse 12, restore me unto the joy of thy salvation. And then he says in 13, then I'll be able to teach other people. If you can help me get straightened out again, I'm repenting of this. I'm sorry. I did the wrong thing. I can almost picture him on his knees when he makes these statements. Now, as you keep that in mind, turn to Proverbs, please. Proverbs 28:13. Proverbs 28 and verse 13. Verse 13. Here we go. Look at David right here. He that covereth his sins shall what? Shall not prosper. But whosoever confesseth and forsaketh them shall have what? Mercy. Shall have mercy. Isn't that exactly what we've seen happen with David? And he's hit a home run. Let's go to Hebrews chapter 11. Hall of Fame of Faith. Hebrews chapter 11. I think we'll start about, let's see, Hebrews chapter 11, probably about verse 32. And what shall I more say? For the time would fail me. What the author, the writer is saying, I'm out of time and I can't give you all these details, but I want to tell you about some people. The time would fail me to tell of Gideon and of Barak and of Samson and of Jephthah and of David also and Samuel and of the prophets. What's he put them in with? Samuel and the prophets. Hall of Fame of faith. Now, have we not seen a change of heart? And that's exactly what we do in the church, is trying to help people understand, no matter, have you heard the statement, I've done so many bad things, I've done so many things wrong, there's no way I can ever be a Christian. No way I can do it. Hey, all you got to do is relate David's story, right? And show him what he did to come back to God. And that he was successful, and he struck out, but then he, like Babe Ruth, he got back up to the plate. Is that the secret? Stepping back up again? Yeah, and then he hit the home run. Look, I've done wrong. I want to change my heart back. I don't got time for one more. Anybody got a question on what we discussed so far? Did I miss something? Say something wrong. I might have misquoted something. If I did, be sure to tell me. But if you got a comment or input, just let me know, because I want to go now. I think we'll look a little bit at Joshua. Let's look at Joshua. Go to Joshua chapter 1, please. Joshua chapter 1. And he had his ups and downs like we do in this life. Yeah, David had his ups and downs. Moses had his ups and downs. Stephen had an up and a down, and that was where he got stoned to death, but he had fall short. He had his ups and downs. Just about we do in our lives, we have our ups and downs. Look at Joshua chapter 1. I love the first part of Joshua, particularly because he kind of puts the game, we're talking about baseball, he puts the game, God kind of establishes the game rules. All right? Now, in Joshua 1:5, he tells him, now this is what I'm going to do. Joshua, this is what I'm going to do. I'm not going to forsake you. I'm not going to forsake you. But, we go to 6, 7, 8, particularly 7, 8. He said, now I'm not going to forsake you, that's my part. But now Joshua, this is your part. Okay, let's look at 7, 8. I always enjoyed this. Only be thou strong and very courageous, that thou mayest observe to do according to all the law which Moses my servant commanded thee. Turn not from it to the right hand or to the left, that thou mayest prosper whithersoever thou goest. This book of law shall not depart out of thy mouth, but thou shalt meditate therein day and night, and thou mayest observe to do according to all that is written therein. For then thou shalt make thy way prosperous, and then shalt thou have good success. Okay, there it is. What? Do what? Do what you're told. Isn't that what we're told today? Oh, be obedient. If you love me, keep my commandments. John 14:3. You want to be my friend? John 15:4. Want to be my friend? Just do whatever I say. He wants an obedient faith. All kinds of faith out there today. But the Lord's looking for obedient faith. And isn't that what he's telling Joshua in 7 and 8? Yeah, obedient. That's what I want. Just want obedient faith. Now, things are going along good. Chapter 6, the walls of Jericho fall. You know they went around 7 times. You're all familiar with all that. Well, guess what? He followed the instructions of the Lord. Yeah, that's what he did. He followed it. Just like he was told in Joshua 1, 7, 8. Now, chapter 7, he slips up. He's got a strike. He strikes out one time here. And I mean, he strikes, and the Lord lets him know, for the sake of time, basically, if you look at chapter 7, 4 through 6, you're going to see Israel defeated by a little small nation called Ai. Yeah. Joshua let something slip by. He let some sin slip by. And just to summarize it real quickly, I don't have time for all the verses right now, but basically this is it. God said everything from this battlefield of Jericho comes to me. That's what God said. All comes to me. In one instance, that didn't happen. Joshua's in charge. His elders, the people under him, obviously knew about this. And Joshua he is beside himself. He's so upset. And look at verse 10 of chapter 7. And the Lord said to Joshua, Joshua's on the ground. He's so upset, he's on the ground. And God said, get up. Joshua said in verse 10, and the Lord said, Joshua, get thee up, wherefore thou liest, but why are you lying on your face? And, in verse 11, you did strike out. Israel has sinned. He said it, the first part of verse 11. Israel has sinned, and they have also transgressed my covenant, which I commanded them. Again, that was all the spoils of this particular battle come back to me. And he says, they have taken even the cursed thing, they have also stolen and they have put it even among their own stuff. For the sake of time, he brought goods and put them in his tent, put them in a hole, to hide things from God, right? That doesn't work very good. But I'm going to tell you, he lays it on the law to Joshua, God does. Up, he said. Second time he told him to get up. Verse 13. Get up. Come on. Get up, Joshua. Sanctify the people and say, sanctify yourselves. For thus saith the Lord of Israel, there is an accursed thing in the midst and of all people. And so it's not looking good right now for Joshua, but there is a rainbow beyond all this thing. He says in verse 13 of Israel, thou canst not stand before thine enemies until you take away the cursed thing from among you, which he said, you're not going to be able to continue this warfare. See how things, y'all know how things went so well at Jericho. Here's a little Ai, killed 30 some of his men, they retreat. And he said, if you don't correct these things, look at verse 13. If you don't correct these things, neither will I be with you. This is in 12b. Neither will I be with you any more. Be sure you note that. That's part of verse 12. Neither will I be with you any more, except you destroy the cursed thing from among you. And the Lord has taken back this Joshua 1 verse 5 when he said, I'm not going to forsake you. Because that forsaking, you see, like all the promises you and I have today from God, he holds true to all of his promises, but they're always conditional. So his promises were conditional to Joshua too. Do what I say. If you don't do what I say, it's going to be a problem. And he's saying you're on your own. In verses 12, 7, 12b, you're on your own. You're not going to be able to stand against anybody in the future if you don't get this thing straightened out. Chapter 7, now look at verse 26. 7 verse 26. And they raised over him a great heap of stones unto this day. That's the one they killed. And so the Lord turned from the fierceness of his anger. Wherefore the name of that place is called the Valley of Achor to this day. Okay? He turned from the fierceness of his anger. Okay, you corrected it? It's okay. So what's happened? In essence, he's in a home run. He struck out, didn't he? But God said, get up. Saying the same thing to you and I. If you're not a Christian here tonight, this lesson applies to all of us, whether you're a Christian or not. Sometimes, as Christians, we strike out, don't we? If you're not a Christian, spiritually you struck out. But you can, just like David and just like Moses and just like Joshua, you can straighten that all out. So just be submissive to his will. If you're not a Christian, hearing, believing, repenting, confessing, and be baptized in Acts 2:47, the Lord add you to the church. And if you're a Christian, you need prayers for the church. Romans 10:9 and 10 will take care of that. We pray with you and for you. If you're subject in any way, please come and stand with the same number,
939.
939, okay. Okay.